Hi there. This is a video about laws of exponents. And mainly one thing that we talk about, laws, these are really just the rules that we use to operate with exponents. So the first question we ask is, what is an exponent? So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to use the number 3, okay? And I'm going to raise that to an exponent of 2. All right, so here's what I want to do. Let's write this out. What this means is that my base is 3. All right, so I call this number my base, and the little number up here is the exponent. All right, and so the easiest way I can explain this is that when I have 3 raised to the power of 2, that really means that I'm doing 3 times 3. All right, which is going to give us 9. All right, so the exponent tells me how many times I'm going to multiply the base by itself. So let's write that down. So that's what an exponent does. The exponent tells us how many times to multiply the base by itself. Now let's look at another example. All right, let's come in here and let's say that we have 3 to the 4th power. All right, so my base is 3, my exponent is 4. And what I want to do is write this as 3 times 3 times 3 times 3. That's what an exponent does. So I'm multiplying 3 by itself 4 times. That's what this means. So now we can evaluate this, and we can do 3 times 3 gives us 9. Bring down your other 3's, times 3 times 3. 9 times 3 gives us 27. Multiply that by 3, and then our final answer is that we get 81. All right, so 3 to the 4th power is equal to 81. All right, so we want to be able to evaluate these, something raised to a power, and so on and so forth. Okay, so let's look at some of our rules. So the first rule that we have is the product rule. And what this means, the word product means to multiply. Okay, so let's look at an example on this. All right, so let's say that I have, instead of 3, let's do 4 to the 3rd power times 4 to the 5th power. Okay? And so when I write this out, and what we want to do is to simplify this. We want to combine these and multiply them together. So what I want to do is let's do this. Let's rewrite 4 to the 3rd power as, let's write that as 4 times 4 times 4. Okay, and now let's go through and let's rewrite 4 to the 5th power as times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so I'm multiplying 4. 4 to the 3rd power means I'm multiplying 4 3 times. When I'm multiplying, by 4 to the 5th, that's multiplying 4 5 times, okay? So now the question is, knowing what we know about exponents, how many times am I multiplying 4 by itself? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This gives me 4 to the 8th power, okay? Now let's think about it for a second. What do we have to do if I have 4 to the 3rd times 4 to the 5th? How do I get 4 to the 8th? What am I doing with my exponents? And what you're doing is you're adding them. So what we can do is we can say 4 to the 3rd times 4 to the 5th is really the same thing as writing 4 to the 3 plus 5 power, where I don't have to write out all this stuff every time, but that's what it means. So here's what I've got. I can write that as 4 to the 8th power. Now let's look at another example. Let's say I've got x squared times x to the 4th. All right? Now knowing our rule, knowing that we simply just add our exponents, what I want to do is write this as x to the 2 plus 4 power, which gives us x to the 6th. And that's all we have to do. Okay? So the rule that we use for this is this. And what I'm going to write here is I have some number a raised to the m power times some number a raised to the nth power. And because we add our exponents, what I want to do is I'm going to write that as a to the m plus n power, and that's what I've got. All right, so when you see something like this, you know, any one of these examples, and you're multiplying two numbers, the bases are the same, then you just simply add your exponents. Okay, the next rule we have is called the power rule, all right? And the first one that I want to talk about is power of a power rule, okay? So we're going to have two rules here. So let's look at an example, all right? Let's say that I take 3 squared and I raise that to the 4th power, okay? So again, you've got something with a power, then you raise it to a power, hence the name power of a power rule. So what you can do here is think about what this means, all right? If I'm taking 3 squared, that means I'm multiplying that by itself 4 times. So here's the structure. 3 squared times 3 squared times 3 squared times 3 squared. Okay? And if I look at it like that, now I've just got 3 squared times 3 squared times 3 squared times 3 squared. Now the question is, once I've got all of these, now I have just the product rule, okay? And what I can do is I can add all my exponents up, and we're going to get 3 to the 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 power, which really gives us 3 to the 8th. So now the question is, you know, looking back at your original, you have 3 squared to the 4th power. What are you doing with 2 and 4 to get 8? And the answer is that you multiply, all right? So what I can do is if I've got 3 squared raised to the 4th power, I can really rewrite that as 3 to the 2 times 4 power, which gives us 3 to the 8th. And we could evaluate from there. Now this number is going to be really big, so I'm not going to evaluate it, but that's what we're doing. Okay, so now let's extend this concept to some variables. All right, so let's write down an example. Let's say that I've got x cubed to the 4th power, okay? And so if I want to expand this out, what I'm doing is I'm really just taking x cubed and multiplying by itself 4 times, okay? And then what I can do is I can add up my exponents because I've got the power rule, the product rule. So I've got x to the 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3 power. And if we add 3 4 times, that's going to give us x to the 12th. All right, so, but we could do it in a quick way. We could say that if you have x cubed raised to the 4th power, then you can just rewrite that as x to the 3 times 4 power, which gives you x to the 12th. Okay? So this brings us to our rule. Okay? So our rule that we can write for this is that if I have, say, a to the nth power, and I raise that to the nth power, then what I can do is I can write that as a to the n times m power. And that's my rule for power. All right, the next one that I have is power of a product rule. All right, so let's look at an example of this. And I'm going to use variables on this one. And we're going to just extend the same idea to what we just had. Let's say that we've got x squared times y all raised to the 3rd power. Okay? So what I can do here, this is where it gets a little weird. All right? But again, I've got this quantity that I'm raising to the 3rd power, meaning I'm going to multiply this quantity by itself 3 times. So here's what I got. I'm going to take x squared y, multiply it by x squared y, multiply it by x squared y. Now, because multiplication is commutative, meaning I can reorder these things, I'm going to write this as x squared times x squared times x squared. And I'm going to multiply y times y times y. Now, if I multiply this out, all right, and I add my exponents, I'm really going to get x to the 2 plus 2 plus 2 power times y to the 1 plus 1 plus 1 power. All right, when you don't have an exponent, your exponent is always 1. So if I've got if I evaluate this, so 2 plus 2 plus 2 is 6, so x to the 6th, and then y to the 3rd. And so one thing that you got to realize here is look at your answer, all right? And let's look at what we did to go from our original to our answer, okay? And what I can do here is if I'm multiplying these, then I can rewrite this as x squared quantity cubed times y to the 3rd power. And all I'm doing is taking everything on the inside of my parentheses and raising it to the 3rd power. Now, because of the rule we just learned, we can multiply our numbers here, and so I've got x to the 6th times then y cubed. All right, so let's talk about what this rule says. All right, so our rule for this is that if I take the product of two numbers, so some numbers a times b, and I raise them to the, say, nth power, okay, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a to the nth and multiply it by b to the nth. And that's our rule for product of a power, or power of a product. All right, the next rule that we have is the quotient rule. Now remember that quotient means division. All right, so let's take a look at something like this. Let's look at an example. All right, let's say that I've got 5 to the 5th power, let's do 5 to the 6th power, divided by 5 to the 2nd power, okay? So if I'm dividing numbers with the same base, all right, and they're raised to exponents, let's expand this out. And let me write 5 to the 6th as 5 times 5 times 5 times 5 times 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 divided by 5 times 5, okay? Now, when I'm doing multiplication and division, all right, when I'm multiplying things in my numerator and things in my denominator, what I can do is I can group these together. And I can look at 5 divided by 5 here, and 5 divided by 5 is going to divide out to 1. And the same thing's going to happen with these two 5s. These are going to divide out to 1. So now, look what you've got. You've got 5 times 5 times 5 times 5. You've got 4 of them over 1. Now, when I multiply 5 4 times, I'm going to get 5 to the 4th power. And so let's think about what we've got going on here. 5 to the 6th divided by 5 squared gives us 5 to the 4th. What do I have to do with the exponents, 6 and 2, to get 4? And the answer to that question is that you subtract. So I would write this, you know, if I had 5 to the 6th over 5 squared, I would write that as 5 to the 6 minus 2 power, which gives us 5 to the 4th. And that's the idea on that. All right, now let's extend this concept to variables. All right? So let's do another example here. Let's say I've got x to the 7th power divided by x to the 4th power. All right, so what I can do here is expand this out. And let's say I've got x times x times x times x times x, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of them. Divide that by x to the 4th. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, if I group these together and I look at these and I start dividing them out, so x divided by x divides out to 1. X divided by x divides out to 1. X divided by x divides out to 1. Divides out to 1. So now, look what you've got. You've got x times x over 1. So now, I can write that as x cubed. So if we think about where we started, x to the 7th divided by x to the 4th, what do we have to do with our exponents to get 3? All right, so using 7 and 4, what do I have to do to get 3? And the answer is to subtract them. So I'd write this as x to the 7 minus 4 power, which gives you x to the 3rd. And that's your answer. So let's talk about our rule here. All right, so your rule means that if you have some number a divided by, so let's say you had a to the m divided by a to the nth power, all right, then all you would do to simplify that is you would use your rules of exponents and say a to the m minus n power. And that's your rule. All right, the next one, let's talk about power of a fraction. Remember, fractions are your friends. So let's look at an example here. All right, let's say that I've got no, let's not use 1. Let's do 2/3 raised to the 4th power. Okay? Now, if I've got a fraction that I'm multiplying it by itself 4 times, I'm going to write that as 2/3 times 2/3 times 2/3 times 2/3. And if I write this, we just multiply our numerators together and our denominators. I'm going to write this as 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 over 3 times 3 times 3 times 3. So as a result, I'm multiplying 2 4 times, so I've got 2 to the 4th over multiplying 3 4 times gives me 3 to the 4th. So the question is how am I going from one fraction raised to the 4th power to raising my numerator to the 4th power and my denominator to the 4th power? And that's really all I'm doing, okay? So, the rule is, one of the way you can look at this is to take 2/3 to the 4th power. I'm just going to raise my numerator and my denominator both to the 4th power and write that as 2 to the 4th over 3 to the 4th. All right? So your rule for this, all right, let's say you had some number A over some number B raised to the nth power. All right, so then I would raise my numerator to the nth power and my denominator to the nth power. And that's my rule. All right, the next rule I have is the negative exponent rule. Now, this one is really tricky for a lot of students, and it's mainly because they don't remember the rule. All right, so this is really important rule here, and I'm going to show you how I develop this rule, okay? So here's what I've got. Let's take an example of something, all right? We're going to use the quotient rule on this, and I'm going to write it down twice. I'm going to write down x cubed over x to the 5th power, okay? And I'm going to do it one way, okay? I'm going to do it the way where we expand it out, and I'm going to write this as x times x times x over x times x times x times x times x, all right? So in my numerator, we've got x cubed. In my denominator, we've got x to the 5th, all right? So now let's start dividing things out. So if I divide out the x here and the x here, those divide out to 1. X divided by x divides out to 1 over 1, and then x divided by x divides out to 1. As a result, look what you've got. You've got 1 over x times x, which gives us 1 over x squared. So if I wrote x to the 3rd over x to the 5th, this is going to simplify to 1 over x squared, okay? Now, let's do this a different way. Let's do this same problem using our rule. So x to the 3rd over x to the 5th. So if I do this using our rule, I'm simply just going to take x cubed minus 5. All right, x to the 3 minus 5 power. Now when I operate in my exponents, I'm going to get x to the negative 2. Now wait a second. I did this 2 different ways. So x cubed over x to the 5th gives me x to the negative 2. I've got 2 statements here. But when I did it one way and I expanded it out, I got 1 over x squared. Now if I do it another way, and I do it using my rule, I get x to the negative 2. So here's the thing. These 2 things are the same thing. And the rule is, the thing that we have to understand is that if I've got, say, x to the negative 2 power, that's equivalent to me saying 1 over x squared. That's the rule. All right, so let's write out the rule in a formal sense. All right, so the rule is if I have some number a to a negative power, I'm going to write that as 1 over a to the nth power. That's my rule. And a lot of times people are going to get screwed up with this, and they're not going to remember this rule. Because I'll be honest with you guys, I also didn't remember this rule for a very long time. And whenever I'd have a negative exponent, it really kind of screwed me up. Okay, so that's the rule. All right, the next rule. all right, is the zero exponent rule. Okay? So let's look at an example on this. Let's say that I've got, say, x to the fourth power divided by x to the fourth power. Again, I'm going to do this two different ways. Let's look at expanding this out. So I'm going to write this as x times x times x times x divided by x times x times x times x. Now when I do this, I'm going to divide out my x's. So x divided by x is 1, x divided by x is 1, x divided by x is 1, x divided by x is 1. So you really end up getting 1 over 1, which is just equivalent to saying 1. And you can also think about this as you've got something being divided by itself, you get 1. Now let's use our rule. Let's use the quotient rule. So if I write this as x to the fourth over x to the fourth, and I subtract my exponents, I get x to the 4 minus 4 power. Well, 4 minus 4 gives us 0. Again, I'm getting two different things. If I do it by expanding it out, I get 1. If I do it by using my rule, I get x to the 0. So the conclusion that we have to draw here is that, again, these two things are the same. And if I write x to the 0 power, it's going to equal 1. Always. So that leads us into our rule, which then states that if I take, say, some number a, raise it to the 0 power, you get 1. Always. Now, I've gone through all of these rules, okay? And it's a lot of stuff. These are a lot of rules, a lot of different ways on how to write this stuff. But the reality is that we have to use all of these rules to help us to simplify things. So we have to use all rules in algebra. All right? And it will help simplify your work. All right? So this is a blanket video on how the rules and laws of exponents work, and you will use them for the remainder of your algebra career. Hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks. Bye.